Hey there everybody, it's Mike DiLisio with another solo mode review. Today I'm going to be taking a look at the solo mode for Blitzkrieg from designer Paolo Mori with the solo rules by David Turczi and publisher PSC Games. Blitzkrieg bills itself as World War II in 20 minutes, and that's essentially what you're getting. You're getting a small war-themed game that plays very, very quickly. The solo game plays relatively similarly to the multiplayer game, so let's head over to the table. I'll give you a little bit of an overview of the component changes and rules changes, then we'll come back here and I'll give you my final thoughts. Okay, here we see a solo game of Blitzkrieg almost set up and ready to go. It's going to be very similar to the standard game because the standard game is simply a two-player game. The solo game is also a two-player game, except instead of playing against a human, you are playing against a bot. The human player will be playing as the allies and the bot will be playing as the Axis. And so the only thing that is different as far as components go are right here. You've got the solo rulebook that's going to explain how the game plays, and it's going to give you a selection procedure, which you'll see in a moment is quite important. You're going to get these 8 stratagem tokens, and you're going to get this 1d6. This one particular stratagem, which is known as the steamroll, starts outside of the cup. The other ones go inside. Now, obviously, this cup didn't come with the game. That's just simply a plastic cup that I took from the kitchen here, and this is just so that you don't really see what you're drawing out of the cup to make it a randomizer. All right? So, all of these theaters of war are set to the neutral position. The only thing that you need to do is determine how difficult you want the game to be. If you want it to be an easy game, what you're going to do is you're going to roll this d6 3 times, and the number is going to correspond to a particular theater of war. And if you play it on easy, you're going to move the AI track up 1 to their side for each of the places you roll. If you want to do it on a medium difficulty, you're still going to roll this 3 times, but you'll advance it 2 spaces in the corresponding direction. If you want to be hard, you'll roll it 4 times and move 2 spaces in the direction of the AI's spot each time. So let's say that we are setting this up as a medium game. I'll roll the dice. So I've got a 3. So you look at these theaters of war. Western Europe will be 1, Pacific Ocean 2, Eastern Europe 3, Africa and the Middle East 4, Southeast Asia 5, and then I'll pick whatever I want if I roll a 6. So 1, 2, 3, we're going to move Eastern Europe up 2 spaces towards the Axis side because we're playing on medium difficulty. I'll roll 2 more times. If I do happen to roll another 3, it'll go up another 2. I did not. I rolled a 6, so I don't want it to go there because I don't want to keep pushing it that way. Let's just pick Western Europe and we'll move 2 there. And we roll 6 again. So let's go with the Pacific Ocean now. All right. Now, the board is really set up and ready to go. You've moved the AI tracker a couple of spots on 3 different theaters of war. I've randomly chosen 3 units out of my bag, randomly chose 5 units out of the AI's bag, and just placed them in a random order there in a line on this side of the board. All right. So as far as rules changes goes, your turn will be taken exactly as normal. Obviously, you have to make some adjustments for determining where the AI is going to be targeting in 3 different ways, primarily. You have to look at which theater they're going to go to. So you have to go through a series of operations to figure out which theater they're going to go to. Then you need to figure out which position within each campaign they're going to go to. And then finally, you have to figure out what unit they're going to play and then take the corresponding actions based on what unit it is. So at the beginning of the AI's turn, what you would do is you would just reach into the cup. And right now, that steamroll is outside of the cup for a particular reason, because that basically would repeat whatever the previous one was, the previous stratagem token was. Well, there was no previous token because it's the first round of the game. So I just randomly drew this out and I placed that back in. And this is known as the rapid deployment stratagem. Okay, so that could potentially determine some of the things that the AI is going to do on this turn. So here's what you have to do. First, determine what theater they're going to go to. So you select a theater. Now, the first thing that they're always going to want to do is close out a potential theater of war. So if there's any theater that it can close and win with a unit, that's going to be where it goes. Well, on the first turn of the game, that will not be the case. Then it looks for a campaign that it can close and win, which that also will not be the case with it being the first turn of the game. And I'm not going into a heavy rules overview. There is some assumption I'm making that you're somewhat familiar with the rules of the game. If you do want to get more of an idea of how the game plays, you can take a look at Tom's review, and I'll link that into the description of this video. But basically, these theaters have campaigns within them that we're vying over, okay? So, it can't close out a theater, it can't close out a campaign. You would ignore any campaigns where it can't legally place one of its units, and I'm getting all of this right here from this selection procedure. And because it has a unit of every type, there's no place it can't place at least one unit. Then you would look to the stratagems filter, and some of these stratagems will have theater filters. So for example, this counterattack has a theater filter, but in our case, the rapid deployment only has a unit filter. It does not have a theater filter, and it also doesn't have a position filter. So then what we do is we continue moving down here. So stratagem filter does not apply. If multiple theaters are tied, most empty spaces in an open campaign. So the open campaigns are the topmost of all of these theater. And in this case, Africa and the Middle East has 4. Everyone else has either 3 or 2. So we know that at this point, the AI is going to go to Africa and the Middle East. But where? Which one of these positions within that theater will it go to? Well, we move on down and we say, positions where it can legally place. Again, we can legally place a unit in any one of those because they have a naval unit, a land unit, and an air unit. So there's nothing we have to worry about there. Specific position that'll close and win. That's not a case. Stratagems filter. Now we look back, and for rapid deployment, it says choose the leftmost valid unit. All right? Oh, I'm sorry. That's for the unit. I'm still looking at a position. So there's no position filter there. So if multiple positions are tied, if the AI bot has more than or equal to 20 VPs, it will go for a propaganda spot, which in this case would be here. But they don't. They have 0 VPs. So we move on. Strategic advantage. This is a strategic advantage point. And if you look on the back of the regular rule book, it'll tell you that this is the strategic advantage. Okay? It looks like this. So we know now that this is the theater, Africa and the Middle East. This is the position. And now we have to look at what unit. And again, we kind of saw this a moment ago. The unit that we're going to be choosing from this filter is going to be the leftmost valid unit. And this is a land space. So it can't be this one, it can't be this one, and it can't be this one because all of those are naval units. The first valid unit would be this level 2 tank. So it would go here. You would evaluate the strategic advantage, and then you would move this 2 spaces to the right, and you would draw a unit as per normal. All right. There is even a way to determine, well, how would you determine how to do the strategic advantage? Well, there's something called the greatest change, and that would be evaluated. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about that here. You would then take your turn as normal, doing what you would normally do, placing your units. So for example, I could put my naval unit here, and this being an industrial production, I can gain another unit out of my bag, move it back to this way, getting it back into the neutral place, refilling my unit from the bag, and then going back and forth to the AI. This is what you're going to do. Going back and forth, trying to battle over these different campaigns and theaters, trying to gain victory points, eventually moving up this track, and the end game trigger is the same, where whoever gets to 25 first essentially wins, and in most cases for me, it's going to be the AI, and you just keep going back and forth, tug-of-war style in each of these different campaigns and theaters until you get the most points after triggering that end game. So that's a brief overview of how the solo game plays. Let's head back over and I'll give you my final thoughts. Okay, hopefully that gives you a pretty good idea on how the solo mode for Blitzkrieg plays out. So I want to just talk a little bit about the solo benchmarks that I tend to focus on. The first one of those being win conditions. Is it a win-loss condition or is it a beat your high score variant? Well, This is a war-themed game, Axis versus Allies. I think the only way a game like this works is if there's a clear winner. And in Blitzkrieg, there really is. It's exactly the same win conditions as the standard game. One of the two sides is going to win, and it's going to be based off of victory points that you get through manipulating those different tracks, among other things that are going to allow you to gain victory points. But it has a clear win-loss condition. It is very much a tug-of-war style game, and you do feel that tension of the backward and forth, trying to get those tracks into manageable positions, not letting a track get too far ahead. You know, sometimes you have to decide, I'm going to give up on that theater, but I really don't want to give up all those points. So clear win-loss condition, something that you're looking for in a game like this with a war theme. The second thing I like to talk about is setup and teardown. And Blitzkrieg is a small game. You saw it on the table. There's not a whole lot to it. There's not a lot of components. There aren't a lot of added components for the solo rules, just a few extra chits and a D6 and the rule book. So setup is a breeze. You're set up and you're good to go in minutes. And that's a huge, huge plus for this game. The fact that it sets up and tears down so quickly and it plays so quickly is a huge, huge plus. It gives you a nice experience. You definitely feel like you've played a game, maybe not a main event, quote unquote, type of a game, but more than a filler too. It doesn't really feel like a filler to me. It feels just like something right in between a filler and a main event type of a game. But the setup and teardown, pardon me, is certainly not a problem at all. The last thing I like to focus on is rules. And the rules, I want to spend a moment on the rules. The rules are not bad. They have a separate rule book. They are very clearly delineated. The reason I want to spend a moment on it is because I want to give you a little bit of what my first experience was like with the rules. I felt like this was an extremely procedural game, and I'll talk more about that in my final thoughts. But the rules are set up in such a way that it really heightens that feeling of it being a series of procedural, kind of almost flowcharts that you're going through, which this kind of styles itself as somewhat of a war game. I don't think you would call it a war game in the traditional sense, but it has at least some of those tropes. And one of the things that you tend to associate with war games are kind of decision trees and flowcharts. And this definitely has that feel. The rule book is very, very procedural, step by step by step by step. That is a good thing. Overall, that's a very good thing, and I'm going to talk more about that in my final thoughts. But I do want to make it clear that when you look through these rules, the first time, it may seem a little overwhelming. There's more rules, in a sense, with the solo rules than there are with the base game rules. Be prepared for that, but just understand that that is something that, once you internalize it, will not be as much of an issue. But the first couple of games, you're going to be in that rule book a lot. All right? So, that being said, let's talk about the overall solo experience. Blitzkrieg is a game that I feel like you need to play solo a number of times before you can really get a good sense for if it's a game for you or not. And the reason I say that gets back to this procedural element. It feels remarkably procedural. As a matter of fact, they call it the procedure when you're going through the solo AI actions. And that can be a little bit off-putting until you internalize how it works. Because for the first, as I said a moment ago, for the first few games, you're going to be going through that every single time. It's like, okay, now I need to figure out what theater it's going to. Now, okay, once I've figured that out by going step by step, I need to figure out what position it's going to be taking. And then once I've done that, I need to figure out what unit. And maybe these stratagem tokens are going to affect it, maybe they're not. And so that can be a bit overwhelming, and it can definitely affect the immersion in the first few games. This is one of those games where the first few times you're playing it solo, you're going to be spending much more time and energy on the AI's turn than you are on your own. Your turns are lightning quick. I mean, you take a turn in seconds, and the AI, you're spending so much more time. And if you only play the game once or twice, I think you may have a negative impression of it for that reason. However, if you stick with it, because it is a short game, you can play a game even the first few games are going to go very quickly, not as quickly as later games. But if you stick with it and you learn that this is a procedure, but it's one that is not difficult to internalize, you'll go much more quickly. And the AI's turns, you'll be able to kind of knock out the first three things from memory and go, okay, I know it's not going to go there, there, or there. So these are the two I think it might go to. Which of these two or three? And it goes much more quickly. But you have to kind of put in a little bit of work on the front end and deal with some of that procedural element at the beginning to make it so it's not such an arduous experience. Because I've mentioned in the past that it's a problem when you're spending more time on the AI's turns than you are on your own. And the first few games of Blitzkrieg, that will be the case. So if you don't stick with it, it may not be a game for you. But I do think that if you give yourself a chance to internalize those rules, that the experience is worth it. Now, that being said, I still do think that Blitzkrieg shines as a two-player game. I think that it really is at its best person against person, because the biggest downside I would have to this as a solo game is that it starts to feel a bit samey after a while, that essentially your games are going to play out very similarly every time. Those stratagem tokens can help the AI be a little bit less predictable, but for the most part, every game's going to play out like every other game. You are going to have different tokens that you're dealing with that maybe allow you to do some things in a more clever sense, but for the most part, you're just playing these tug-of-war games back and forth with the AI, and it's not going to be much different than anything else. And you could say, well, it's the same game when you're playing against another person, and that's true, but when you're playing against a human, you can do a little bit of getting in their heads and trying to figure out, okay, well, I think they're going to do this, and maybe they think I think they're going to do that. And so it adds another element of meta a little bit to the game that makes it more fresh in a person to person. With the AI, there's only so much they can do to add some unpredictability, to add some change to the experience. And so that's really the biggest negative that I have to the solo game of Blitzkrieg, is just that I don't know quite how many plays there are out of it. If I'm being honest, there's not a whole lot of difference from game to game. Now, that being said, I think that Blitzkrieg as a game is a terrific game, especially as a two-player game, and it's still good as a solo game. I think that if you were going to buy it only as a solo game, you just would have to keep in mind that it probably is something that you're not going to be wanting to pull out 2-3 times a week, maybe every month or so that it feels fresh to you every time you play. That being said, I still give Blitzkrieg as a solo game my recommendation. I rate it a 7 out of 10. Give it my seal of approval. If you give it a chance, if you let those rules internalize, I do feel like you'll find that it is a worthy experience for you as a solo gamer. Thank you so much for your time as always, and have a great day.